I've spent more than a decade of my life living in countries that people imagine are much worse than they are. And the argument people always throw at me, having left the high-tax United States to live in much more tax-friendly countries overseas, is that I'm sacrificing some kind of conveniences or infrastructure because I live in places that don't have tax, and that's simply not true. Now, let me be clear. Not everywhere that I live is totally tax-free. Places like Dubai, for example, have pristine roads and a lot of things function very well. They're simply tax-free countries. Other countries like Malaysia, for example, have tax systems where if your money is earned overseas, they leave you alone. They want to focus on taxing people who are making money in their country, from jobs, from investments, from things actually happening in the country. And so what's a tax-free country for you may not be tax-free for someone else, but obviously here at Nomad Capitalist, we want you to take advantage of all the different incentives that the world has to offer. And so I was driving in Malaysia from Kuala Lumpur to Penang recently. It's much easier just to drive the 4 hours than it is to go to the airport and fly and get taxis in both ways. So I get a nice car and we drive up to Penang. And what I was realizing, and I took some pictures, the roads on this entire 4-hour stretch through a lot of places that are really in the middle of nowhere are pristine. There's great roadside services. There's cell service the entire way. There's places to stop and buy food. I mean, things just work as well as they would work in pretty much any developed country. There are no potholes, at all. Everything just functions very well. And yet foreigners are able to live in Malaysia, have a very tax-friendly situation, and benefit from this infrastructure that people wouldn't imagine exists, because they think that all the good infrastructure exists in the West. And so if it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce your taxes, protect your assets, increase your freedom, and grow your opportunities. And so let's contrast this to what's happening in Europe right now. Someone made a point. I asked, well, what about, why do we pay taxes? What's the benefit of taxes? And somebody said, here's one answer that stood out to me. Roads, because it's impossible to have roads without high taxes, they said. Number 2, to live in a civilized society. Number 3, to prevent a violent organized crime group from taking control and racketing people willy-nilly. And airtight protection against drugs and terrorists. And so let's compare Malaysia, where the roads are in fantastic condition, or Dubai, where the roads are in fantastic condition. But let's compare Malaysia, where the society is civilized. People are extremely nice in Malaysia. Preventing violent organized crime. There's no organized crime where I live. I haven't been the victim of any violent organized crime anywhere. I haven't been the victim of protection or racketeering. In fact, you'll see countries that used to be in the USSR, for example, and have more economic freedom than the United States. And airtight protection against drugs and terrorists, I would say countries like Malaysia do a better job against that by actually having proper security that's not invasive and that is pleasant enough to deal with at the airport, for example. There's more airtight protection against drugs. I mean, maybe some people don't want that, but to this person's point, that's what you pay taxes for. The government's there to protect you from terrorists, drugs, violent crime, and provide civilization and roads. And the places where I live, you have all of that. Now, you could argue in Latin America, I spent some time in Colombia, their roads aren't as good. And sure, there are some areas of Colombia that probably aren't under very much control. But if you set aside some parts of Latin America, and you look at Eastern Europe, if you look at Southeast Asia, if you look at even parts of Africa, you can dramatically reduce your tax bill. And in comparison to Europe, let's see what's happening in Europe. You're going to get a much better deal. In France recently, 2,500 petrol stations, gas stations, had no fuel. An additional 2,000 were running low. You look at a map of France, they put the map out. All over the country, places where you simply couldn't get fuel due to the energy crisis that's happening in Europe. Top rate in France, 48% when you add in all the different income taxes that they have. 48%. The government's supposedly supposed to direct not only roads, but energy policy. They're supposed to make sure you have the services. Why do people not move to places in the middle of nowhere? They want functioning internet that actually works. They want roads that they can transport their goods on, and they want energy to get there. In France, you didn't have that, and you were paying half your income, 2 points shy of half your income, to have no fuel in 2,500 petrol stations. In Germany this summer, you had landlords turning off the air conditioning and basically rationing energy. The government now is going to pay your energy bills in December, and of course we know who's going to end up paying for that eventually. Europe has an energy crisis. And yet people say, oh, why do you talk about Europe? There are some good countries in Europe. I happen to have spoken highly of countries like Ireland and Switzerland. By the way, what do they have? They have tax incentives for foreigners to come. And they say, all right, whatever you're doing overseas, like, all right, we'll kind of leave you alone. Right? There's a correlation, perhaps, between countries that think they're entitled to everything that you produce, even though maybe it was produced somewhere else. And they're the ones that don't have fuel, don't have energy. And yet you have places like Ireland and Switzerland which function better. So I'm not against everywhere in Europe, but I'm against places where people want to insult the places we talk about, where when I returned to Kuala Lumpur in August and I saw the headlines from Germany, I was sitting in the car coming home. I get my smart home. I turn on the ice cold air conditioning, and I return home to a cold home with all the air conditioning that you can muster. And that's the difference. Where I'm from, in Cleveland, not only, by the way, speaking of racketeering, was there a big corruption scandal a number of years ago. One of the most corrupt places in the United States. Plenty of places in the United States that are plenty corrupt. They did a big clean out of the county and city government. The roads stink. Why have people send me pictures? Like, oh, hey, I'm back in your hometown. Look at this giant pothole. You're paying a fortune. You're paying state tax in Ohio. You're paying federal tax. And the roads just aren't that good. Meanwhile, other parts of the United States, there was a big report not so long ago about how a city in Northern California may just simply run out of water in the next 2 months, and that the only workaround they could figure out is actually extremely costly. Who's going to pay for that? Well, if you're living in California and you have any kind of money, you're the devil. So of course you're going to pay for it. And so whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Europe, you're paying a lot of money for not a lot in return. We recently found out that China has a higher life expectancy now, for the first time ever, than the United States. The United States life expectancy just basically got rid of 2.5 decades of growth. 76.1 years. Japan, Korea, every European country from Switzerland on down has a higher life expectancy than the United States. China now joins that list. China. And I ask myself, okay, in Malaysia, in China, they have taxes. In some of these countries, again, you can use exemptions, exclusions. They want you to come if you're a foreigner. They want you to bring, because they'd rather you, let's say Malaysia, for example, or Ireland, they'd rather you come and bring your money and spend money, because they realize if you had to pay full taxes, maybe you wouldn't come to begin with. Like, they believe in actually a fair system of tax. And by the way, if you live in Malaysia, you're paying extremely cheap prices for gas compared to the rest of the world. Same with many places in the Gulf. But in there, obviously, you're paying some costs to keep the roads up. So the idea that higher income taxes pay for roads is not necessarily true in many places in the world. But the point is, you're paying these higher taxes. Sure, you could live in Malaysia and pay full boat taxes, and top rate's about 30%. So you're still paying substantially less than you would in France or in the United States or many other places if you made that amount of money. If you're a foreigner living in these countries and you're taking my advice, living the nomad capitalist lifestyle, your tax bill could be very, very low, and you're going to have the benefit of all these services. So let's stop attacking places that are somewhat up and coming. Malaysia is, by some metrics, wealthier than some of the Eastern European countries in the EU, or even one or two of the Central European countries. The quality of life, I would say, is quite frankly just as good in a place like Malaysia versus, let's say, Slovakia, the Czech Republic. And so the numbers in some cases aren't actually that different. And Malaysia has the benefit of having better weather, and depending on where you're comparing it to, probably nicer people. And so governments that are always used to taking your money, they're always used to expecting it from you, are going to keep doing that. The countries that have said, hey, come on in and we'll provide more value than what you're paying for, which is what you would expect from a business, by the way. Right? What do they say in business? What's the lesson for entrepreneurs? Always go above and beyond. Always impress your customers. Add the extra touch. Certain countries want to follow that. Other countries think you're a jerk because you didn't vote for the school levy, because you think, hey, you know what? They've already got enough of my money. Why do they need more? If you're in France, if you're in the US, if you're in any other of these places in Europe and you're paying 48%, maybe the problem is they don't need more of your own money. Meanwhile, in the UAE, they're using all that oil money, right? Oh, they can only do it because they have oil money. Who cares why they're doing it? Do you want to pay 48% or do you want to pay 0%? Right? I'm not concerned whether they're using oil money, because, by the way, the United States has plenty of oil. Why aren't they using it? Why are they squandering their resources? Why are they squandering tax dollars and all kinds of stupid stuff? Maybe they could lower their taxes if they spent money properly, stopped wasting it, stopped having politicians doing what one guy called a smash and grab. Every election cycle is a smash and grab. They go in, they grab a bunch of money. It's a lot more corrupt than some of these countries are in the United States, and they're wasting your money to do it. At least if you're not paying taxes somewhere, what do you care how corrupt it is, as long as it doesn't affect your day-to-day life? Certainly you might like the corruption to go away, but you're not going to change the corruption in any country, including your own. And so, at least in the UAE, they're using the resources they have to save you money and provide you a better experience. That's how competition works. In places like the Cayman Islands, they just hate taxes. Like, we don't want these taxes. Go to a place like that. You're going to find better services. You're going to find better infrastructure. You're going to find plenty of things that work. I mean, in Malaysia, 1 gig internet. I don't know, I pay like $30 a month or something. It's incredible. Why is it they can do it and your country can't? And so what happens when people don't like competition is they've got to start crapping on the competition and saying things that don't count. There's nowhere I've gone in Malaysia. Now, if you go to some private diving island or something, you're not going to have great internet. There's nowhere I've been in Malaysia. There's nowhere I've been in Thailand. There's nowhere I've been in the UAE. I've been all over these places where they don't have good internet, good roads, everything just works. What's your country's excuse? So the answer is having higher taxes does not necessarily mean a better product. The same way that buying a pair of shoes at Loro Piana or Louis Vuitton doesn't necessarily mean they're better than some pair of shoes you buy from an upstart company online. You pay more for a brand, and if you like paying more for a brand because you want the LV logo on your shoes, hey, I'm totally with you on that. I like that. But understand you're paying for a brand. You're paying for Germany, you're paying for France, you're paying for the United States, and you're getting like something else. And yet you can also go to the place that's the upstart, the Malaysia, the UAE, all these other places that have tax friendliness, and you will get a much better deal for your money.